This is the residency lecture of Mikołaj Wiśniewski, and I'm going to tell you about him in a second, for the American Institute of Philosophical and Cultural Thought. This is a part of our ongoing series of lectures in American thought, especially American thought, and today we go a little more literary than sometimes we do. We have a few folks with us live, just enough, but if you guys who are joining us online have questions, there's going to be a question and answer period afterwards, and apart from that, the only other thing I have to say is that our speaker is my colleague and friend from SWPS. Would you say in Polish the name of this university?
Well, it's now called the SWPS University, but SWPS stands for the School of Social Psychology. That's what our university started out as. But
So it's a private university of the social sciences and humanities, has a campus in Warsaw, a campus in Wrocław as well. A very successful endeavor and prestigious place to go to school, and a not cheap place to go to school either, especially given that most higher education is free in Poland. But in this case, I had the good fortune to meet Mikołaj through our friend Marcin Richter, who is sitting here and also has been here, but he's been playing. He hasn't been working. He's been playing at the institute for the last month. But Mikołaj has done some work, work while at the institute, and so it's our tradition to have a residency lecture at the end of a scholar's time here. So Mikołaj is professor, habilitated professor. This is important in Europe, not so much around here, at SWPS University, and teaches American literature and American history in the English Language Studies division. Right, but his PhD is in philosophy from the University of Warsaw, and so there's a broad-ranging humanistic interest that he brings, especially to the literary texts that he studies and that he teaches, and in particular, Herman Melville is a specialty of his. He's the author of a book on the Hudson River poet James Schueller, and is also translator of Melville and editor of Melville in Polish. And so he has for those of you who read Melville, you know, you can imagine what it must be like to try to translate Melville into any other language, let alone one as removed from English as Polish is.
pretty challenging, but pretty challenging, rewarding.
Yeah, and so Mikołaj is going to tell you a little bit about some of his projects before he dives into this very interesting thesis he has about the narrators in Melville, a thesis with which I heartily agree. All right, so.
Thank you. All right, thanks, Randy, and thanks for having me here at AICPT. PCT, yeah. Sorry, I can never get that right. Well, anyway, what I have here to start with are on the left, this cover. This is a cover of Literatura na świecie. This is a very famous, renowned Polish bi-monthly. Started in the 1970s, and for quite a while now I've been involved in this project of reissuing works by Herman Melville. By the PIW stands for Państwowy Instytut Wydawniczy, that is the Polish State Publishing Institute. In 2018, I was invited, along with my friend Adam Lipschitz, to help them do this, to bring out new editions of Melville's works, plus the critical apparatus that we prepare for this series. So, Moby Dick, we already worked on. Moby Dick came out first in an old translation. We have a very good translation by Breitwieser Wiśniewski. Then Typee. what was really exciting was working on a volume of Melville's short stories, because previously only the ones included in the Piazza Tales came out. So that these were not all of the stories that he wrote between 1853 and 56. So we translated. A group of translators, including Marcin, who's here, worked on translations of the previously not translated short stories by Melville, and that was challenging, very exciting, very. You get a totally different insight into an author once you try grappling with that, with translating such a sophisticated, dense text. So I translated, for example, short stories such as Jimmy Rose, Cock-a-doodle-doo, Poor Man's Pudding, Rich Man's Crumbs, and so on. But today I would like to talk about Typee, and I guess the main reason is that I will be talking about two groups of American critics who I believe have said some inaccurate, not to say downright absurd things about Typee, well, I would like to challenge that. These are, of course, not the only critics who have written on Typee, but two pretty, I think, important groups of critics. So I'll tell you who they are in a moment. The title of this talk, Melville is described as a chameleon novelist, and what I mean by this is that, well, he from the very beginning had to use strategies of camouflage. That is, he had to, in order to publish, he had to present himself not as a novelist, but as a writer of a travel, autobiographical narrative, which Typee is not. So this is what I mean by Melville being a kind of a chameleon. He just pretends to be one of those popular authors of popular travel narratives. He just wouldn't be able to publish this book if he presented it as a novel, as fiction. And I think that what is very important about his first novel is that you can see that already in that first work of his, he is interested in one particular phenomenon, which he then explores in his later works. That is kind of what we could call a cognitive blind spot. That is, he's interested in narrators who describe reality, but they cannot grasp a certain element in it, right? They cannot see the reason. So, for example, in Typee, the narrator Tomo cannot understand until the very end why he's being kept by the Typee, why they don't want him to go away. He assumes it's because they want to eat him, which is not the case. And so, but Tomo doesn't know that. Melville knows this very well, and it's very important not to confuse the narrator of Typee with Melville, which some critics unfortunately do, as you will see in a moment. So you get a similar thing, for example, in Bartleby. Later on, the narrator of Bartleby is unable to see the reason of Bartleby's strange one-man strike, and I think this is important to keep in mind, that already when writing Typee, Melville is constructing a certain narrator, and he will be doing that later on in different ways in his other works. Well, okay. What I will do is, I'm sure you know the story, so I'll just repeat the most important facts about Melville's journey to the Marquesas, and I will then present these two groups of critics that I mentioned. But in order to critique them, I think it's important for us to have a look at the story of the publication of Typee, because it's pretty interesting. And in fact, I'm going to argue that this thing, that is this is the Northwestern Newbury edition of Typee, which came out in the mid '60s, and is considered as the canonical edition. That it's not. That perhaps that is not the book that Melville actually intended. Okay, so I'm going to go into these details of the publication of Typee because they're interesting, funny, but I think they also allow us to see that Typee is a novel and not a semi-autobiographical book about Melville's adventures. It's based on that, but it's not. It's definitely not the same thing. So anyway, Melville left America in early 1841. He was 20, almost 22, and he decided to work on a whaler to help out his family. After his father's death, the family was in financial dire straits, and so to relieve his mother, he decided to work. I guess he also wanted to see the world, to go on an adventure. Working on a whaler proved too much for him, and he deserted after almost a year and a half, when the ship Acushnet stopped for provisions in the Marquesas on Nukuhiva. There you have it. It's that big island in the middle of the chain. They just split, and Melville spent a month living with the Typee, who were believed to be man-eating cannibals, but he did not stay with the Typee for 4 months, as Tomo in the novel. He spent around a month there in the valley of the Typee. We know that on the 9th of August he was back at sea aboard the Australian whaler Lucian. It took him more than 2 years to get back home. He returned at the beginning of October 1844, having visited Tahiti and Hawaii, having served aboard the U.S. Frigate United States. This is what, of course, White Jack is based on. So definitely a lot that is in the story of Typee did not actually occur. For example, the first part, the walk, right? The walk across the jungle to the valley of the Typee was not as hazardous and long as it is described in the novel, and it doesn't seem that Melville's that the circumstances in which Melville left the valley of the Typee were as dramatic as they are in the novel. Okay. Now, initially, when it comes to the way in which the book was received in Britain and America, it's very interesting that there were two different reactions. That is, in Britain, critics were mostly interested in the question: is this story true? So they were interested in the veracity of what is described there, because it was published by a publishing house dedicated to travel narratives. So people were quite skeptical as to whether the events described there were true. In America, on the other hand, the critics were offended. A lot of critics were offended that Melville presented American missionaries in Hawaii in a very negative light. It was also this book was also considered indecent because of the descriptions of the sex life of the Polynesians. But I want to focus on two groups of critics that wrote about Typee. One I call the Cold War critics, the Cold War interpretations, because it's mostly texts about Typee written in the 50s and the 60s. I think that the Cold War context is important, in fact, for these critics, but I'll talk about that later. There's a reason why I call them Cold War interpretations. Well, this is the book that in which these essays are collected. Critical essays on Herman Melville's Typee, edited by Milton Stern. The book came out in the 70s, but as you see, many of the essays there were written much earlier, including Stern's. They say a pretty strange thing about Typee, according to me, at least. That is, Stern, or for example, Richard Ruland, who is another important author in the volume, they basically argue that it's a story in which the point of which, right, is the realization that that these dreams about a simpler, more natural life that the Typee are leading, as opposed to Western developed commercial societies, that is just an illusion, right? And that is the point of the story, to realize that the Typee are in fact, well, they put it in pretty unpleasant terms, right? They say that the Typee offer nothing to the world of mind, that they are beautiful, mindless, and blind. They are magnificent animals, and that they are somehow less than human. So Stern says this is this horrible realization that Tomo has in the story, right? That he will be. It's not that he will be eaten by the Typee in his body, but that he will lose his. Well, basically, Stern and Ruland argue his identity as a representative of the West, as a Westerner. Ruland, for example, he says one very shocking thing, as you will see in a moment. But he also continues to describe the Typee as creatures that have nothing to live for, and that they are cannibals in the sense that they want to devour Tomo's identity, everything that makes him what he is. His curiosity, his desire for communication, his delight in contemplation, his awareness of time and sense of history, in short, his need to understand the complexity that is human life. Well, so basically both Stern and Ruland argue this is a story of someone who realizes who he is as a Westerner, and that he cannot, and that he, in order to preserve this, he has to resort to violence. In fact, you can see that clearly in Ruland. He argues that this violence is justified, that it's necessary. He says this, and this is the thing that I find a little bit shocking, and I think not true about Melville and about this novel, that Melville would have us cheer when Tomo strikes his violent blow. Towards the end of the story, he has to, in order to get away from the valley of the Typee, he gets inside a boat, he's pursued, and he strikes a violent blow. He strikes one of the Typee pursuing him. Right? It's not quite clear, by the way, in the novel whether this is a deadly blow or not. Tomo himself is not sure whether he actually killed that that person who was after him. So anyway, Ruland says, Melville would have us cheer when Tomo strikes his violent blow, for a life is thereby saved. The inner life, which Tomo only vaguely senses, has been in danger. Okay, let's leave this at that for a moment. I'm going to get back to this interpretation later on. Another group of critics that I also think are not getting Typee quite right are group of critics you could call postcolonial, who are postcolonial critics. And I have here two examples, one from the 90s, one from the 80s. Well, there's Malini, Johar, Schueller, I think that's how you pronounce her name, in an essay called Indians, Polynesians, and Empire Making, the case of Herman Melville. She also, in a way, just like Ruland and Stern say, deep inside, Tomo is a Westerner, right? But unlike Ruland and Stern, this is not something positive to her, right? She points out that that Tomo's avowed admiration for the Typee, their way of life, in fact, is underlined by his Eurocentric attitude of superiority. For example, she says, he always describes the Typee as children, as infantile. There is, for example, a scene in the novel when Tomo makes pop guns for the natives, and they all flock around him and behave like children. These are the terms in which Tomo describes the Typee. He says that they clamored around him like children. Also, she points out that the Typee are mocked by Tomo in a way because they do not know how to use Western artifacts. So, for example, this old chief Marheo, he hangs Tomo's shoes around his neck, and she argues that that Marheo's status is thus undermined, ridiculed, and that Marheo is equated with the value of his colonial possessions. She also argues that Tomo only admires the Typee because of their similarity to Europeans. So he stresses that the fairness of the Typee is due to their almost white complexions that differentiate them from the rest of the savages. That whenever he finds the natives beautiful, admirable, it's because they are they look European. So, for example, when describing Marnu, one of the characters in the story, he says, the natural quickness of the savage had been wonderfully improved by his intercourse with the white man. Right? This is another example, according to Schueller, of Tomo's Eurocentric and, in fact, colonial attitude towards the natives. And just one more thing, which I think is important, because, well, okay, let's read this passage, and we'll, I'm sure you'll see what is wrong here. So she says this, one of the most striking revelations about the narrator's need for control is his impatience with the polyglossia of the Typee language. Its annoying peculiarity, and that's a quote from Typee, is the different senses in which one and the same word is employed. Its various meanings all have a certain connection, which only makes the matter more puzzling. So one brisk, lively little word is obliged, like a servant in a poor family, to perform all sorts of duties. And she comments on this by saying the following: the versatility and richness of language should have been an inspiration to an aspiring writer, young Melville, as it was with the complicated etymology of the whale at the beginning of Moby Dick. But the linguistic prerogative traditionally belonged to the European American colonizer. Well, the problem with this is obviously that she's conflating, right? She's conflating the author and the narrator here. That is, it's Tomo who makes this remark, but Schueller is well, challenging Melville, critiquing Melville, the author. And well, that is a big problem because they're not the same. And in fact, Melville does use this this strange ambiguity of Polynesian of Marquesan words, their ambivalence. In an interesting way. Towards the end of the story, when Tomo is running away from the valley of the Typee to get aboard the ship, he hears this word, the detestable word "rooney," which I had heard repeated 1,000 times during the day, was now shouted on every side of me. He never explains what that word means, and I'll talk about that later on, so I'll keep you in suspense here for a moment. But it's, in fact, I think a very important thing that Melville is doing here, right? He's he is aware, right, of the potential, right, of that strange ambiguity of Marquesan words, even if Tomo, his narrator, is annoyed by it. Okay, so that was Malini, Johar, Schueller from the 1995 essay. I already pointed out one problem with it, right, that she's conflating the author and the narrator. Mitchell Breitwieser, I think that's again how you pronounce his name, doesn't do that. In an earlier essay, it's called False Sympathy in Melville's Typee. He is, however, also criticizing Tomo, even if not Melville, for being unable to see Typee except as a negation of America. So he's basically arguing that that this uncertainty, right, this pleasure mixed with fear, constant fear, that Tomo experiences in the valley of the Typee is in fact the effect of his own ambivalent feelings towards America. That is, on the one hand, America, which promises self-reliant masterlessness, but at the same time reduces persons into units of labor, a specialized disjecta member attached to an economic body in whose free intelligence they do not participate. So he likes the Typee, Tomo does, for the things that that go against the American, American, the fact that people, right, get in this capitalist economy and Protestant culture, right, get reduced to units of labor. What he doesn't like about the Typee is that they threaten this promise of self-reliance and individuality by wanting to assimilate Tomo into their tribe. So basically, Breitwieser's argument is that everything that Tomo says and sees about the Typee is just a reflection of his own problems with America. So he says he doesn't see the Typee, but he just simply uses the Typee culture by representing it as a negation of America. And then he says, rather than comprehending it as a coherent, independent culture in its own right. Well, this is an interesting argument, but I think it's one that is, in a way, what is wrong with it, I think, is that this is one of the things that Melville intended about his narrator. Yes, of course, this is what is going on in this story, among other things. I'm not sure what if this is the accusation. What it seems that Breitwieser would like to see a different book, right? Simply, right? Not a novel, but perhaps an anthropological tract by some early 19th century version of a Claude Lévi-Strauss. Right, to see the Typee as coherent and as a coherent and independent culture in its own right. Okay, fine, but we wouldn't have a novel then, but a scientific tract. And Melville is writing a novel. Okay, I'm going to get back to these two groups of critics in a moment, but first. In order to make to stress this argument that Melville is writing a novel and that he is constructing a particular sort of narrator, I think it's important to look at the publication story of Typee. just very quickly, the reason why Gansford Melville, that is Melville's older brother, is presented here is that he helped his brother get the book published. He was an important force here. Melville started writing Typee soon after his return. By the summer of 1845, the book was almost finished, and when he visited his brothers, Gansford and Allen, in New York, he submitted it for publication to Harper, but it was rejected. They called it worthless because they said the events described could not possibly be true. Then Gansford got a job in London. He was sent to London as secretary of the American legation in the Polk administration, and he took the manuscript of Typee with him, and he promised his brother that he would try to get it published. He showed it to John Murray, who was the owner of the Colonial and Home Library, and they specialized in publishing travel narratives, real exotic stories. Murray was suspicious as to the veracity of the events described there. So he said, "Yes, I will publish the book, but we need to add some more chapters that would have facts." Anthropological, interesting facts about the Typee, and Melville agreed to do that. He added 3 chapters, the ones that you see here, and so finally, Typee was published in London first in February of 1846. But 2 months later, it was also published by Wiley and Putnam in the States, almost the same version. So it came out almost simultaneously, in London and in the U.S. However, the interesting thing is that because of this criticism of American missions, and because some passages in the book were deemed obscene, Wiley and Putnam asked Melville if he would agree to publishing that very same year a revised edition, or we could perhaps call it a censored edition. So that very same year, Wiley and Putnam published the revised, censored, you can call it censored, edition, from which some 30 pages were removed. Again, those passages in which Melville criticized, in very bitter words, the work of American missionaries in Hawaii, but also all these references to the promiscuity of Polynesian tribes were left out. Passages describing the orgy aboard the ship when it reached Nukuhiva. Not the feeblest barrier was interposed between the unholy passions of the crew and their unlimited gratification. Sentences like that were left out. Now, so the Typee until the 1960s, in fact, functioned in 2 versions, right? You had this revised version, and that was the one which was published in America, mostly, and the British version, which you could call the full version. In the midst, I think it's 1964, when this Northwestern Newberry edition of Typee was published, the editors returned to the original version published in England, and this seems this seems natural, right? It seems to be the right choice. That is, well, yeah, okay. Melville was forced to agree to having the book censored, and therefore, this is the version that should be the canonical one. But there's a problem with that. So that's the version, right? Sorry, that's the edition. There's a problem with that, which I'm going to skip that for a while. I'm going to return that because Melville actually, in a letter to Murray, the London publisher, he actually said that this was the right choice, that this was the right thing to do, to have these passages removed. And he said this, that the revision excluded only those parts not naturally connected with the narrative, and that this imparted a unity to the book which it wanted before. So it seems that he's interested in removing these passages that are, well, today you might call them social criticism, right? Current social criticism. He's removing that in order to make the book more of a novel. He said that all these passages about American missionaries in Hawaii, he says that they are altogether foreign to the adventure, and although they may possess a temporary interest now to some, yet so far as the wide and permanent popularity of the work is concerned, their exclusion will be beneficial. Towards the end of his life, when Arthur Stedman was preparing a new reprint of his works, and Typee was to be published first, of course, Melville still insisted that is this revised version, or we may call it again censored. Although I think Melville didn't feel that it was censored, but he wanted that version to be published and not this one. And I think the reason is that again, he wanted it to be seen as a novel, and not as a travel narrative simply, or current social commentary. However, the editors of this edition reject Melville's own assessment, right? They say that this was a rationalization of an action he had been forced to make, or even say that the removal, right? The fact that Melville agreed to remove the more daring allusions to promiscuity of the sailors and Polynesians were a result of Melville's altered notions of propriety in his old age. Well, I don't want to argue that they're completely wrong, and of course it's important to know that Melville did write these passages, but I think it's also important that he in fact didn't have he did not think that removing them would hurt his work. In fact, there is enough irony, very bitter irony, in the story itself to the work of criticizing American missions, American colonialism, is already there, and he doesn't have to verbalize it in a straightforward way. In fact, I think removing these passages meant that he didn't have to add sentences like such as this one, right, to tone down his criticism, lest the slightest misconception should arise from anything thrown out in this chapter or indeed in any other part of the volume. Let me here observe that against the cause of missions in the abstract no Christian can possibly oppose. It is in truth a just and holy cause, but, right, then he goes on to add some more criticism. He doesn't have to do that because there is this bitter irony that is already there for those who notice it. Removing these passages allows Melville to develop this strategy, which he later described when talking about Hawthorne, right? In his famous essay "Hawthorne and His Mosses," he talks about how Hawthorne's fiction is directly calculated to deceive the superficial skimmer of pages, and that if you pay more attention, you will see the darkness beyond. Right? You may be witched by Hawthorne's sunlight, transported by the bright gildings in the skies he builds over you, but there is the blackness of darkness beyond. And it's one thing that is important to understanding, right? That Tomo is not Melville, right? That Tomo is a certain construct, narrative construct, and that actually Melville knows more than Tomo and sees more than Tomo, and that we as readers can grasp more. Is the fact that Melville prepared himself when writing this the story, right? He didn't simply write about his own experiences, but he wrote a lot. Having returned from Nukuhiva, he read a lot about the Pacific, the Polynesian tribes. For example, he read this work, David Porter's Journal of a Cruise Made to the Pacific, and in that work, I think a lot of passages in Typee are inspired, not so much by what Melville himself saw, but what he read in that work. For example, there is this moment in the story when Tomo thinks he has finally obtained proof of the cannibalistic practices of his hosts. He writes this. He says this: "I observed a curiously carved vessel of wood of considerable size, with a cover placed over it of the same material, and which resembled in shape a small canoe. It was surrounded by a low railing of bamboos, the top of which was scarcely a foot from the ground. As the vessel had been placed in its present position since my last visit, I at once concluded that it must have some connection with the recent festival, and prompted by curiosity I could not repress in passing it, I raised one end of the cover. At the same moment, the chiefs, perceiving my design, loudly ejaculated, 'Taboo, taboo,' but the slight glimpse sufficed. My eyes fell upon the disordered members of a human skeleton, the bones still fresh with moisture, and with particles of flesh clinging to them here and there." So Tomo takes this as proof, right, that the Typee are indeed cannibals and that they might eat him. Well, in Porter's book, Melville would have read that the Marquesan tribes have this tradition of secondary burial. That is, the body is left to decompose for a couple of months, but then in there's a ritual in which the bones are stripped of the decomposed flesh, the removal of skulls and long bones, which are then buried separately, reburied. This is this final ceremony to allow the soul to finally journey to the other world. So Melville had that knowledge, but Tomo, right? But Tomo does not see that, does not know that, and you have a lot of examples of this sort in Typee. This is an interesting photograph actually taken by Jack London during his travels in the Pacific. And this is a photograph of natives on Nuku-Hiva. They have a gramophone here, and it's interesting in that, in fact, the Typee treat Tomo as a commodity. He's not aware of that, but their attitude to him is of that sort. So that is the reason, that is the thing. That baffles Tomo. Why are they keeping me there? And again, Melville would have known. The reason which Tomo is unable to fathom. You can read about that in Greg Denning's great book about Marquesan history. The Typee need Tomo as a beachcomber, a go-between between their tribe and the Westerners and the colonizers. It's important for their survival. The tribes that did have these go-betweens, the beachcombers, were simply faring better, and the Anata, or the Marquesans, felt possessive of these individuals. They felt that they owned beachcombers as they owned their muskets and their clothes. In that sense, Denning says, Anata were jealous of them. If they thought they might be leaving, they kept them away from the ships. So this is this little thing, right, that Tomo is unable to comprehend, because he is unaware of the larger forces at work here in this valley, which he would like to see as a valley, as paradise, right? A valley that is pure and not polluted by the outside commercial industrial world, but it's already there. And Melville makes it pretty clear, or well, he I don't know. We don't have the full text here.
I don't know how that happened. Anyway, maybe they have it online. I don't know.
Okay. Well, but there are these hints, right? There are these hints to read Tomo's narrative differently, or to see beyond what he's actually telling us. So, for example, when Tomo and his friend are entering the valley of the Typee, and this is something that quite a few critics have observed, they are described as serpents, Right? They said they were reduced to crawling on their hands and knees and screened from observation by the grass, through which we glided, much in the fashion of a couple of serpents. Then there's this moment when they finally get to a stream to drink fresh water. The water is so cold that it causes this very unpleasant sensation, and Tomo uses this metaphor, which is in fact a reference to Milton. He says, "Had the apples of Sodom turned to ashes in my mouth, I could not have felt a more startling revulsion. A single drop of the cold fluid seemed to freeze every drop of blood in my body." This reference to the apples of Sodom is, or this mention of the apples of Sodom here is in fact a reference to Paradise Lost, Book 10, in which the fallen angels greedily pluck the fruitage fair to sight, like that which grew near the bituminous lake where Sodom flamed. This more delusive, not the touch but taste deceived, they fondly thinking to allay their appetite with gust, instead of fruit chewed bitter ashes, which the offended taste with spattering noise rejected. So what's happening here is that the words that Tomo uses, and he doesn't seem to be aware of this, imply that they are the serpents. Or that he is Satan stealing into this paradise, so. Getting back to these interpretations, right? First Ruland and Stern. I call them Cold War interpretations. But let's perhaps get back to them. If you look at the story. I don't think it allows for that statement that that Tomo triumphantly manages to resist the lure of this mindless life of the Typee, and that he triumphantly asserts his Western identity or defends his Western identity. Tomo is. There we go. Towards the end of the story, there's no sense of relief, triumph of any sort. The book ends with Tomo completely confused, and he is a man who's lost his bearings. He is torn between staying in Typee and going back home. The next novel, Omu, begins with him actually feeling this deep melancholy, pain that he left Typee. He wants to leave. He doesn't want to leave. He is torn. He's unable. He's confused. So I think this interpretation is simply wrong. It does not describe, right, the state in which the narrator is in towards the end of the novel properly. Simply. So to say that Melville would have us cheer when Tomo strikes his violent blow for a life is thereby saved, the inner life of Tomo. I think the reason these critics read Tomo in this way, and that's why I call them Cold War interpretations, is that they would like to suggest that Melville is in fact here rejecting these naive beliefs about noble savages, and asserts the necessity, asserts the superiority of Western culture and the necessity of colonization, or the necessity of imperialism, but good paternalistic, benevolent imperialism, as opposed to a harmful one. And he does introduce towards the end of the novel, or actually after the end of the novel, in the appendix, he praises General George Pollitt, a British general who invaded Hawaii in 1843, occupied Hawaii in 1843. So he seems to be arguing, yes, there are these bad imperialists, like the missionaries American missionaries that he described, but there's also this good paternalistic imperialism, and these critics say, and Melville believes in that. That's why I call them Cold War, because it seems like a reflection of, the two imperial powers. One, the good American sort of imperialism, and the bad Soviet-style imperialism. I think this is what is behind, really, the arguments of these two critics. The other group, of course, the postcolonial interpretations. First of all, again, both of them. The problem is that both of them don't treat Typee as a novel, right? They would like to see Typee as some sort of a different book. Schueller confuses it with a personal narrative of the author and a story, right? She conflates Tomo and Melville, but Breitwieser's arguments, what he says about Typee. In a way, you can respond to this by saying, well, yes, exactly, this is the case. Of course, the way Tomo describes the Valley of the Typee, it's full of the way he sees them, the way he is unable to see them, right? Is a result of his preconceptions, of his attitudes towards America. Of course, but that is exactly the point of the story, right? That we are dealing with a totally unreliable, subjective narrator. So in a way, I would say that Breitwieser is kind of, can you say that, kicking in an open door, right? That is, he's pointing out something to which Melville, I think, could reply, exactly. That's what I wanted to do, to create a narrator like that. Otherwise, I would have written, as I said before, an anthropological, objective anthropological treatise, right? And not a novel. So finally, getting back to this word, the word Rooney, which I heard repeated thousands of times. As I said, Melville doesn't explain the meaning of that word, but if you check it, it is one of those very puzzling words in which different or even contradictory meanings come together. The detestable word Rooney means both to catch, to stop, but also to welcome. That is to be a host, right? So it combines violence and hospitability, right? Or violence and something negative and positive, right? This is exactly of course, it reflects the confusion of the narrator towards the end of the story, right? He doesn't know what happened, in what his experience in the Valley of the Typee was about, because as we showed before, right? He's unable to grasp what is behind it, right? What is, the reasons behind it, and this is what we get towards the end of that story. A narrator who has been completely confused. He is. He can never go back, right, to the same assumptions, to the same feeling of certainty about things that he had before. He's uprooted, lost, and he can never be the same again. But at the same time, these postcolonial interpretations also suggest that Tomo's experience in the Valley of the Typee was that he did not see the Typee at all, that nothing happened in the Valley of the Typee, that his experience was just the result of his own inner assumptions, his inner turmoil. Well, I don't know if it's fair to say that. I'm going to end with a quote here. Sorry. Tomo says, "Even now, amidst all the bustle and stir of the proud and busy city in which I am dwelling, the image of those trees seems to come as vividly before my eyes as if they were actually present. And I still feel the soothing, quiet pleasure which I then had in watching hour after hour their topmost boughs waving gracefully in the breeze." So it's not like Stern and Ruland would like to have it, that Tomo triumphantly rejects this illusion, right, that he was tempted by, and that he asserts his identity as a Westerner. Well, something happened there, even if he is confused about what exactly happened. There is this melancholy, right, in him. This feeling that there was something about this experience that was genuine. He just cannot put his finger on what it was, but he misses it. So Tomo loses his identity. He is in a way poisoned, pretty soon he would go out to sea again. This time as Ishmael, I think. So that is it, I guess. I don't know. Thank you very much, and perhaps let's talk a little bit about all these different things that I just presented to you.
Sure. I did want to say something first, which is, I don't think that there can be any question that Melville is experimenting with unreliable narrators or narrators who don't get something, what you're calling a cognitive blind spot. First of all, look at Bartleby. I mean, our narrator's completely confused all the way through, and of course, so are the readers about this. But just think of the beginning of Moby Dick. When I was teaching that book once, I was pointing out that Ishmael is the ultimate liar. And one of the students said, "Yeah, call me Ishmael." That doesn't exactly inspire confidence. In other words, he won't even tell you his name, and he makes one up for himself, and we never find out who he really is. But then there is there's that passage in the middle of Moby Dick where Ishmael begins to speak directly to us as readers and to tell us a story about how he tried to tell the story of Moby Dick to a group of people in South America who didn't believe him and made him go swear on a Bible, but he never actually does swear on the Bible. They go to get it, but don't have one among them. And so he's even tipping us off that this is an extremely dubious story, it's impossible to believe. And why on earth would Melville put that in there except as a way of sort of letting us know, it's like, by the way, I'm not Ishmael. Ishmael has all kinds of issues that are not necessarily mine, but he knows he's talking to you, a reader, and he knows it doesn't sound believable. And yet, he betrays himself by saying, and I tried to tell this story once before, and nobody believed me.
I think the one difference between Tomo and Ishmael is that Ishmael is more aware of his of what he's not seeing or what he doesn't want us to see. Right? He's more there's more I think self-irony in Ishmael. Not to say that it's completely missing from Typee, but I think these narrators with blind spots is what Melville does, creating these narrators with blind spots, or narrators who lie to themselves, or who perhaps even don't know that they're lying to themselves. It's something that he develops, of course, in the shorter fiction, including, of course, Bartleby, but other stories like Jimmy Rose, for example. But my point here was that he is doing this from the very beginning. He cannot publish a novel presented as fiction because no one would publish it.
Why? Why would no one publish it?
Because he was nobody at the time, and I think the tendency back then, if you wanted to publish it in America, definitely, right, would have a hard time because at that time in the early mid-40s, they wanted to publish still British authors. So it was, I guess, very difficult for a young aspiring author to publish fiction, right? That changed later in the 50s, right, when popular magazines started inviting American authors to contribute. But back then in the 40s, it was still Dickens, and that's so he has to use this strategy of camouflage, or he's like a chameleon. He's writing a novel, but he has to present it as something different. And I think it's very telling, therefore, what he did by accepting these changes. What we can see as censorship, right? He doesn't have a problem with that, because that makes his book more of a novel. Mm-hmm. And in fact, through this strategy of fooling the superficial skimmer of pages, but actually including allusions, references to something deeper, right? Something that is more troubling, and yeah, that's why it's that is not, you know, this version, right, of Typee is not necessarily the one that Melville would have liked to see published as the canonical version.
Okay, well, other questions? Anybody online got something? Unmute yourself if you do. I can't see you.
I'll ask a question. You hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. So yeah, so it's extremely interesting, Nikolai. I really enjoyed this. I love this stuff. This reminds me, you mentioned Greg Denning, and I've read a couple, a bunch of books related to this. And Greg Denning has one, Captain Bligh's Bad Language. You probably know it. And he talks about the Europeans, Captain Cook and those fellows, going, and when Captain Cook was killed in Hawaii, and he explains how Cook and Cook's men thought they sort of understood the Polynesians, and they were sort of playing their own understanding of the Polynesians, but all the time the Polynesians had them fitted into their own social, cultural, religious roles, in other words. And so there was this sort of theater going on. So the Polynesians, for example, killed Cook and ate parts of Cook, I suppose. And then next day it was a sort of, when is Cook coming back? Because Cook was something that was not, well, he was something to them. He was fitting into a role that was not out of European sort of thing. So in other words, they were sort of hoodwinked. They thought they were in control, but it was actually the Polynesians that had the narrative, and they were sort of more in control. And so this is interesting from what you were saying about the confusion of Tomo. Obviously, Melville's a writer and a narrator. And so in a sense, to have Tomo confused is perhaps to understand that however we're trying to compartmentalize these people, we can't do it, maybe. And so in a sense, maybe is Melville truer and more, he has a better understanding of them, that he can't understand them than the critics do, maybe.
So of course, if you I think the same thing goes for Bartleby, right? That you as a reader can offer various reasons, right? You can, which the narrators cannot grasp, right? And of course, one of the answers here about Tomo is that the reason is he is being treated as a beachcomber, right? He has to fill in that role, which he's not aware of. He's not aware that he's being forced into it.
But Melville must know that.
Well, that is my feeling, and I think there's a lot in this text to indicate that. For example, this feeling of superiority that one of the postcolonial critic was pointing out, right? And she well, basically accuses Melville of creating a character who although he sympathizes with the Typee, has this colonial attitude to them and a feeling of superiority. He treats them like children and so on. Well, she argues that Tomo's attitude is like that, and sure it is. Or he believes that is the case. But at the same time, there's great irony in the fact that he is completely useless to the Typee as someone who brings, superior knowledge or superior technology. He is unable to give the Typee any information about the British and the French who are who have their headquarters in the other valley. He's unable to fix a musket. They bring him a musket, and he just, he doesn't know how to do it. And so if you, I think you can see what Melville is doing here, right? On the one hand, yes, he does create this narrator who seems to be, who seems to have these feelings of superiority, and at the same time, there is an event which undermines that, right? Which proves that, well, that's not the case. Whatever Tomo would like to believe, that's not the case. He is. It's the Typee who know better, right? Who know what the situation is, and they're using him. They're using him as a commodity. He's not aware of this, but this is exactly what Denning was pointing out about the Anatas, or the Typee's attitude towards beachcombers. They treated them as things that could be replaced. Tomo is he senses this, but he's not aware of that, and this is of course something that that he finds troubling, right?
The later anthropological studies that were done of the Polynesian islands, I'm thinking of Malinowski in particular, where you've got a gift economy. And at one end of the Trobriand Islands, they have these shells, which are plentiful, and they can't be found at the other end of the chain. And so as the shells work their way from one end of the Trobriand Islands to the other, they take on increasingly important economic prestation. To give somebody something is to expect something in return, and if they're treating Tomo as a commodity, and it's a gift economy. I don't know if it's an economy of prestation, such as Moss describes, Marcel Moss. But the point is that if he is a commodity, then it's both a gift and a curse to have him. They both want him and don't want him, precisely because a gift is an obligation, and in fact something that at least on some Polynesian islands people are pretty superstitious about, and we still are. If I give you a gift, you want to know what I want, and why are you giving me this gift, and now what do I have to do, et cetera, et cetera. It really hasn't gone away. But if he is a gift, and that makes sense of your Rooney thing, because guest, catch him, right? It's the same irony. Yeah, it's this, because if you let it get away, then it's a different kind of problem. In
that word, and in the ambiguity of that word, it encapsulates the larger the contradictions, right, of the which and the contradictions are there because Typee, right, the Valley of the Typee is not, of course, this paradise secluded from the outer world that Tomo would like to see it as, but it's already been poisoned, right? And in fact, Tomo is in a way one of the poisoners, right? Although he's not quite aware of this. All this confusion, right, and this feeling of ambivalence towards the Typee, right, is a result of the fact that Tomo is not aware of the larger circumstances, right, and that these two worlds are already intricately connected, and within that he doesn't know.
Well, how much can he possibly know?
He doesn't know what his own position is,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
And what,
well, not only that, but how much could anyone in his position?
Right.
I mean, you wouldn't have to be from a colonizing power to find yourself in this situation where you don't know what's happening to you, and whatever explanations you give to yourself are going to be those of a very young man who doesn't know much about the world, and so what would you expect except cognitive blind spots? Do you remember being 22? I mean,
hardly.
Yeah, but how much did you know?
Yes, but it's
and how much did you think you knew?
You mentioned Malinowski, right? But it's again, I wanted to stress that this is exactly what Melville did not want to do, right? He did not pretend to, although he knew a lot about, by the time he started writing Typee, he knew a lot about the.
Always speaking of Tomo, not of Melville.
Right, but he doesn't want to write any sort of a scientific, objective, anthropological thesis. Right?
Unlike Ishmael, who really does want to write that, which is why Moby Dick is interrupted by an entire course in cytology, right?
Or at least, yeah, he thinks he can do it.
He thinks he can do it.
He thinks he can pull it off.
Well, he gets it wrong. The whale is a fish, right?
I think there's a good reason why he doesn't
never
want
mind.
to see
I
the
don't
whale
mean
as
to distract you. Besides, there might be more
but that's
questions.
a different story.
Hey, Robin, do you have a question? You're unmuted.
Okay, yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Oh, I don't hear you though, Robin. You're unmuted, but I'm hearing you.
Yeah, he has a question.
Well, it's not really a question. It's more of a. Huh?
No, not you.
Oh, it's more of a I guess, general observation. Today, Melville could say or promote his book as historical fiction, and he still might have problems getting it published, but at least he could say historical fiction, and that would give critics and academics less to argue about, but he could market it as historical fiction, and that was one point. And my other point, of course I haven't read this canonical book, but when I find an author or a poet that, or even like a movie director that I really enjoy, I like looking at different versions. And so if this book, and I don't know if it does, if it says, here's what Melville wrote, and then it has little notes that say, this part was in this version of the book, and this part was taken out for this version of the book, I appreciate reading the different versions and just thinking about it myself. It's like, well, do I think this adds to or detracts from what he was trying to say? And there are a lot of books that I know there are different versions, and even like autobiographical material, like I can choose to read the 1-inch thick Charles Nider autobiography of Mark Twain, or I can choose to read the 9-inch thick 3-volume autobiography of Mark Twain, and it just depends on what I'm in the mood for at the moment, and if I want to see what the person intended this way. And like when you get multiple copies of papers and the academic says, well, we found this chapter and we don't know when Melville wrote this, and we found this chapter, and it's obviously the same chapter, but we don't know which one he really intended. I just like reading those kinds of things and trying to decipher for myself, or just appreciate that it went through multiple revisions and kind of try to put together the history.
Mm-hmm. Well, what my argument, right, was that there was a reason why Melville didn't want to have these 30 or so pages included in the final version, because I think he talks about, when he talks about Hawthorne, right? He talks about how this strategy of hiding unpleasant, dark truths under a story that seems that may seem even trivial. Melville is actually able to criticize colonialism, imperialism in a stronger way, right? He doesn't have to moderate his statements, saying, yes, well, these missionaries are doing something bad, but in general the cause of missions is a noble one. He doesn't have to do that. He can include a much harsher, stronger criticism and a bleaker darker truth, right? By having just a story, right? Just this narrator with a blind spot. It makes it simply darker, right?
Are there other questions from the?
There was a question.
Online? Yeah, did Robin type something in?
Not yet. Oh, yeah, he just did. It says the sound isn't working. Excellent presentation. The book is a peep at Polynesian life. I am not sure the issue is an unreliable narrator in the sense that Melville is somehow different from his narrator. The narrator learns as he goes through his experience and seems fond of the natives' open sexuality and lack of Christian belief. He doesn't want his face scarred and determines to run off.
Simple enough. He just doesn't want the scar.
Yeah, well, that's the thing that he doesn't want to be assimilated into this tribe, right, or marked, right, as a commodity, as a commodity that belongs to the Typee. But I would say that the narrator actually, what is interesting about this novel is that the narrator does not so much learn as he goes, but he becomes more and more confused. Right? I think that is ultimately the.
But Robin is saying, take the thing at face value. You don't need all of that. I mean, his question is basically, do you really need all these gymnastics? When in fact, it's a story. You take it at face value.
But it's a story which ends, right, with the narrator reaching this point of utter confusion, and I think that this is important, and it completely goes against what these Cold War critics, right, said about the novel.
Well, maybe Robin would say they're overreading it too, and you're just counter-overreading it.
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
I disagree with Robin if that's his point. I don't know if it is, but there is a common sense about it that says, oh, come on. It's just a story.
Yeah, it's just a story, precisely. But it's a story that, the way it's constructed, right, as a novel, and I think the way he constructs this unreliable narrator, right, allows you, if you appreciate that, you will see in what way both of these interpretations of Typee that we talked about here today are wrong, right? And that they want to reduce the story to just this or that, right? One particular statement or attitude, and that's just not possible, right? Because if you do that, well, the first group reduces the novel some sort of a, well,
Cold War statement, right?
yeah, Cold War statement, basically, or an apology of paternalistic benevolent imperialism, which I think is completely absurd, to make Melville, to see Melville as someone like that. The other group of critics, they reduce the story to yes, again, this also a statement of colonialism, right? Hidden, concealed colonialism, and they see it as something not so positive, right? But it's almost as if they expected this book to be a different book, right? Therefore, yeah.
Well, isn't their point that you can, we need to conclude this, but isn't their point that you can read Melville in the present and it just reinforces whatever colonial prejudices you have, unless some critic says, and by the way, look at all these presuppositions that are in this book. I mean, I'm not sure they're trying to get Melville right so much as they are, or say he should write a different book, as to say that when we read Melville, we need to be sensitive to the colonialism that is throughout, and that no matter how enlightened Melville himself may have been, which was certainly more than most people, with regard to the problematic side of colonialism, he's still part of the problem, not part of the solution. I mean, that would be a more balanced way. But when you get into the detailed reading, of course, you shouldn't confuse the narrator with the author and all of those sorts of things. I do think that there's a book to be written on confusion, Melville's use of confusion. I don't think that book has been written yet, but if you think about The Confidence Man, holy cow. I mean, the whole book is about the use of confusion. And of course, it's very confusing to read it. But the point is that it's clear that from the beginning, confusion is something that he's going to use as a literary tool.
But also, from the very beginning, what interests him a lot are these narrators who see certain things or don't see certain things because of their own assumptions. So even if that, even he does have these colonial, imperial attitudes, even if he's not aware of it. But that is the point of the story, right? I think Melville is trying to show how how that can happen. Right? That is, you can think one thing and about yourself and
be wrong
or be someone completely different. But that is his interest. It's in Bartleby with the lawyer who cannot see the reason for Bartleby's behavior. And of course, you've got it in Benito Sereno. Right? There, the blind spot, let's say, is caused by other factors. But it's I think that was the overall point of my presentation, right, is to not to see Melville as someone who started out as an author of this personal travel narrative, and then started experimenting and doing other things. But it's from that very first novel that he is interested in constructing a narrator that he will later use also in other contexts, in other stories.
All right. Well, with that said, with the restatement of the thesis, thank you, Mikołaj, and
thank you.
I look forward to discussing this with you further over a beer.